Hello everybody and welcome to this latest Foundation Years vodcast. My name is Thorpe, Head of Begin Bright, and I'll be your host for this discussion. This podcast focuses on safer sleep for early years settings, specifically the intention of the Department for Education to update the wording in the EYFS from September 2026. Today we're joined by Shona Jenner-Whatford, Senior Policy Advisor in the Safeguarding and Health in Early Years Settings team at the DFE, and also by Wendy Ratcliff, HMI, Principal Officer for Early Education at Ofsted, and Caroline Hearn, Early Years Specialist Advisor at Ofsted. Firstly, Shona is going to discuss the updated wording to the guidance, and then Caroline and Wendy are going to answer some questions around what the updated wording means for inspections. Over to you, Shona.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to talk about why the DFE is amending the Safer Sleep Guidance. So the safety of our youngest children is a priority, and we're always monitoring and reviewing safeguarding requirements so we can make sure that babies and children are as safe as possible. There have sadly been cases of children dying from unsafe sleep practices. So therefore, it's really important that we do all we can to prevent this from happening again. There is already an expectation in the EYFS that children are put to sleep safely, and providers should already be acting in accordance with the NHS Safer Sleep Guidance that the EYFS currently links out to. And this includes things like babies under 6 months always having an adult in the same room as them for every sleep. We plan to update the wording in the EYFS to make these requirements explicit and to clarify them, and so that they're in one place in the EYFS. This updated wording was developed with input from the Lullaby Trust, medical experts and Ofsted, and can be seen in the letter from Minister Bailey, which was shared with stakeholders in April. So in terms of what the changes are, just in case you haven't seen it, we have listed it all here. I will just briefly go over them because it's really important that we all understand what these are. So this is for children under 2 years old. Providers must ensure that children are placed on their back in their own separate sleep space on a firm, flat surface, such as a cot, a bed, or a mattress on the floor. And for babies aged 12 months and under, must only be placed to sleep in a cot. And by cot, we are referring to cots, carry cots, Moses baskets, and travel cots. And providers might find it useful to refer to the British safety standards. Sleep spaces must only contain a firm, flat, waterproof mattress and lightweight bedding that's firmly tucked in around the child below their shoulders to prevent head covering. You might want to use a baby sleep bag, but do check the manufacturer recommendations before using one. Where blankets are used, do make sure that the child is placed feet to foot at the bottom of the cot with their blankets tucked in. Cots must not contain any extra items such as toys, pillows, extra blankets, bumpers, wedges, or straps. This is because of the risk of suffocation. Children should not get too hot or cold, and the recommended room temperature for babies is 16 to 20 degrees Celsius. Children's heads must not be covered. Babies under 6 months of age must always have an adult in the same room as them for every sleep. And then all children must be frequently checked whilst they are sleeping and be within sight and hearing of staff whilst they are sleeping. Practitioners must read NHS guidance on sudden infant death syndrome. This is the NHS guidance. And we also recommend that you have a look at lots of the guidance available on the Lullaby Trust. They have a very helpful website. And these changes will come into effect from September 2026. This is subject to parliamentary and legislative process, but providers should already be following the NHS guidance. I am just going to briefly talk about floor beds, also known as coracles and sleep pods. So the department has sought expert advice from a safe sleep academic in order to provide guidance to settings on this. We know we've had lots of questions. Taking this advice into account, the department is recommending that floor beds for children are only used by early years providers for babies that are aged over 12 months. And this is due to the safety concerns associated with babies aged up to 12 months. And we've listed the risks on here. So a prevention of future deaths report for a bedside sleeper crib highlighted the risks of partially lowered sides. And the lack of coordination and torso strength in babies aged under 12 months does mean they could get caught on the side. So therefore, a cot, a carry cot, a Moses basket or travel cot that fully meets British safety standards and that is used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions is the safest place for a baby aged 12 months and under to sleep in. And I've listed below the British safety standards for these products. It is important that the product if they say they meet the standard, that they meet the full standard, not just relevant parts of it. They have to meet the full standard to say that they meet the standard for that. That is it from me. I will hand over to Ofsted for their Q&A section. Thank you.
Thank you for the thorough update there, Shona. And as you rightly state, we can now move on to welcome both Wendy and Caroline from Ofsted as we move on to some questions in relation to these updates. So firstly, what happens if a setting is inspected by Ofsted before September?
Thanks, Seb. That's a really great question. I think it's really important to say that the changes that Shona's been talking about, they're not new, are they? It's about reinforcing and clarifying existing requirements and then bringing everything into the EYFS. So we know, don't we, that early years providers, they're already required to meet the safer sleep requirements set out in the EYFS statutory framework, which currently links to NHS safer sleep guidance. And this includes things like an adult always being in the same room as a baby aged 6 months and under, so that's not new. Safer sleep practices are so well established that they're now going into the EYFS rather than the EYFS linking to the external web pages. So until the changes come into effect, we will regulate and inspect according to the current EYFS, but providers are and should already be acting in accordance with this. But as noted, the majority of these changes are already required, but currently accessible via external links from the EYFS rather than being embedded explicitly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. We know that babies and children often fall asleep in buggies or prams when out and about. Is this still okay?
That's a really interesting question. Happy to take that. We get asked this one a lot, actually. So children get really good learning and development experiences when out about, so we certainly do not want to stop that happening. We know that children are likely to fall asleep when they're out and about as well. So even if you're out about just for a short time, say a school run, baby could still fall asleep during that time, and that's fine. So what we are saying is pushchairs and prams should not form the main sleep space for babies or children. However, this does not mean that settings can't take babies and children out in buggies and prams, and if they fall asleep, they must immediately be transferred to an appropriate sleep space when they return to the setting. So I can run through some of the guidance points on that might be helpful for people. So when you return to the setting, babies aged 12 months and under must be transferred to their cot once they've returned. Hats and extra clothes should be moved, even if it means waking the baby, because children can really heat up with those extra garments on indoors. Children aged 12 months and over should be transitioned to their separate sleep space as soon as possible, with clothes and blankets adjusted to prevent overheating. And a bit about car seats as well. Car seats should never be used as a main sleep space. And if a baby or a child falls asleep in a car seat, or they arrive at the setting asleep in a car seat, they must be transferred to their sleep space when you return to the setting, or when the parents drop them off, you must transfer them at that point rather than leaving them in the car seat.
We know that many settings have raised queries about sleep pods or coracles. Are these types of items allowed?
Oh, that's quite a multi-leveled question there, and I'll pick that up. So there's lots of bits to that. So the DfE are encouraging settings to follow the guidance, which is that children are placed down on their back in their own separate sleep space with a firm, flat surface such as a cot, bed or mattress on the floor. Babies aged 12 months and under must only be placed to sleep in a cot. Cots include cots, carry cots, Moses baskets and travel cots. To be clear, by sleep pods and nests, we mean those that are soft with raised or cushioned sides. The Lullaby Trust have some very helpful advice on these, which is that they should not be used because when sleeping, babies shouldn't lie on or have anything around them that is soft, particularly around their heads. This is because it can cause them to overheat, increasing the risk of SIDS. Soft and squishy material can also cover baby's mouth and nose. So floor beds, also known as coracles, are sleep spaces that have rigid or semi-rigid sides and are stackable. The department has sought expert advice from an academic expert and recommends that these products are only used for babies aged over 12 months. This is due to the safety risks, which have also been highlighted in a prevention of future death report related to a bedside sleeper crib, where a child suffocated after getting caught in the partially lowered side. The department has been advised that the lack of coordination and torso strength in babies under 12 months could mean that they get caught on the side if they squirmed or attempt to get out of bed with a partially lowered side. And we do know that children tend to squirm about and move about in bed, so that's definitely a risk. And then Wendy, I think you were going to had some points here as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Caroline. Thank you for that. So I think ultimately, we must ensure that the safety of our youngest children is put first. So a cot, carry cot, Moses basket or travel cot that fully meets British safety standards and is used in accordance with the manufacturer's instruction is the safest place for a baby aged 12 months and under to sleep in. So on Moses baskets, these are considered to be suitable for babies up to 6 months or when a baby is around 9 kilograms. So providers should use their professional judgment regarding these products. For example, if the baby's head is at the top of the basket, then this product is no longer suitable. Now, the DfE have also suggested that providers may find it useful to refer to the British safety standards. So when you're looking at a product, check to see if it has the British safety standard. These are listed on the Help for Early Years Providers article, which we would encourage you to read. Do check that if a product lists a British safety standard, it matches the ones the DfE have listed in their article. For a product to fully comply with a particular British safety standard, it must fulfil all the requirements of that standard. If in doubt, you could contact the supplier. Information gained from the supplier then forms part of your risk assessment, and you should also be using all the information within the revised EYFS to help inform your thinking in respect of what is and is not safe.
We know that there are many providers who operate completely outdoors, for example, forest schools. Are there any exceptions to the requirements for these types of settings?
Thanks, Seb. So we absolutely know that high quality outdoor provision can do this really well. So there are just some key points I think we need to think about here, because all providers must follow the safer sleep requirements, and that's not changed. And we understand that outdoor settings operate differently to other settings and do not have rooms as such. However, the specific needs of babies and children still need to be taken into consideration. This includes providing them with adequate space and suitable equipment, and all the safeguarding and welfare requirements in the early years foundation stage must still be followed. And that includes the requirements on safer sleep. So essentially, this means that outdoor settings need to follow the guidance, and this includes not using prams or pushchairs as the main sleep space for babies and children.
Thank you, Wendy. The guidance states a recommended room temperature of between 16 to 20 degrees Celsius. What happens if there's a heat wave or an extreme scenario like we've had quite recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know we can have periods of excessively high temperatures, where it's really challenging to keep children cool. And this is where we see should in the EYFS. So the requirement on room temperature is a should, meaning that it must be taken into account and followed unless there is a good reason not to. If the provider is making every effort to maintain the minimum room temperature, but factors outside their control, such as extreme temperatures, and at the point of recording this in summer 2026, we know we've seen some extreme temperatures, so we know that's been challenging due to weather condition. If there's anything about the weather conditions that prevent that from happening, it would be deemed as a good reason not to, but the provider's then taking steps to keep those rooms as cool as possible.
Thank you, Caroline. And another question that we've been asked is, can settings use a baby monitor to supervise sleep?
So let's think about that, because what works for settings will of course vary. So if we think about some of the key points here, it's really important that babies and children are appropriately supervised while they're sleeping. Babies under 6 months must always have an adult in the same room as them whilst they're sleeping, and this is stated in the NHS guidance. So this means that if you're operating across multiple rooms, even as a childminder, you must always be in the same room as a baby under 6 months whilst they're sleeping. And this may mean that you need to adjust the age of children and babies within your care. Now, children over 6 months must be within sight and hearing, but they do not necessarily need to be in the same room as you. A baby monitor here can be used, but it must meet the requirements of the baby being within sight and hearing. So you must also frequently check on them whilst they're sleeping, of course. So there is no specific DfE guidance on the frequency or the way in which checks should be carried out. However, it's really important that babies and children are checked frequently. So you may also need to think about how you balance keeping an eye on a monitor if you're using one and the time spent with other children who are still awake.
Thank you, Wendy. And some people have raised concerns as the children in their care seem to need a certain soft toy to help them get to sleep. Would this be allowed?
That's a really, really good question, because we know that children will have a favourite toy or comforter, and how they are used is the key point here. So you need to build routines that help children become secure. Whilst a baby under 12 months may have a favourite toy or blanket, you need to consider how you can meet their needs and ensure sleep spaces are safe. So comforters, small soft items used for emotional reassurance can only be used by children aged over 12 months. This is because of the potential risk of suffocation. The sleep space must not contain extra items such as toys, pillows, extra blankets, bumpers, wedges, straps. There's so many things that can make their way into a cot. The Lullaby Trust has some really useful information and advice on why a clear cot is safest. And we understand that settings may face challenges from parents and carers regarding this if they believe their baby needs a comforter. So we'd recommend the setting strongly encourage parents to read the guidance and encourage them to help parents understand that guidance. So a comforter is not a dummy, and there are no plans to change the use of dummies, but I just do want to point out quite a key point here, that when dummies are used, you need to think about this really carefully, especially when we know how crucial early interactions are to children's language development.
Thank you, Caroline. And finally, if parents or carers feel very strongly about their baby or child being put to sleep in a particular way that doesn't align with the guidance, would it be okay not to follow the guidance if written consent is provided by parent or carer?
Thanks, Seb. This is a really great question, and actually one that's often raised with us. And I think as early years educators, we play such an important role, don't we, when working with parents? And we're uniquely placed to share why these practices are so important. So let's look at what the EYFS and legislation has to say. So if we think about the Childcare Act 2006, this does not allow for any exemptions from the safeguarding and welfare requirements of the EYFS. So this means that all early years providers must meet all the safeguarding and welfare requirements, even if a provider has been granted an exemption from learning and development requirements, for example. Therefore, a waiver signed by parents or carers does not exempt a setting from meeting the safeguarding and welfare requirements, of which we know safe sleep is one. So this means even if a parent and carer wants their child to only sleep in a buggy or to have a comforter despite their child being under 12 months, a setting must follow the guidance. And I think it's important that we direct parents to the DfE guidance, and also that opportunity to contact DfE themselves if they have any queries. But it's important that we make sure we share with parents why those requirements are there. Now, we understand that some parents and carers of children who may have special educational needs may feel anxious about this. So again, as providers, you should follow the points that we've set out alongside using your professional judgment. For example, there may be circumstances where a child could be rocked to sleep in a pram, but then transferred to their main suitable sleep space once they're asleep. And, you know, remembering what's set out in the EYFS.
And that now brings this discussion to a close. We hope that you'll find this information useful when taken back into your settings. A huge thank you to Shona, Wendy and Caroline for providing their expert insights. And if there are any further questions, please do contact the Foundation Years team and we'll be happy to forward those queries onto the relevant teams within DFE or Ofsted. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon for our next session. Thank you all.